Hello, my name is Steve McKeithen. I'm the Associate Director of Bands at Fresno State and Director of the Bulldog Marching Band. I'd like to thank banddirector.com for the opportunity to present my teaching modules of best practices. And in these modules, you'll find many techniques and skills that are centered on the development of your students' tone, pitch, and core of their sound relative to not only marching band, but certainly for your concert ensembles as well. These are all what I have found to be best practices based on my 12 years of public school teaching, 10 years of drum corps teaching, and then also 10 years teaching at the collegiate level. I hope that you find these modules very useful for your students. Please share them with them, and looking forward to hearing your feedback from these videos. Thank you so much, and enjoy the module. One of the first things I would incorporate as a band director would be to learn the methodologies of the breathing gym, which was developed by Pat Sheridan and Sam Palafian. The technique is essentially an accelerated process for teaching students how to take in a tremendous amount of air, not build stress in the body, and how to manage that airstream across time in order to build their strength of tone. It's a wonderful methodology. There are a lot of ways about incorporating that into your everyday ensemble setting. But I would certainly start there because I think the main thing is to teach students that they can take in a lot more air and move a lot more air, but certainly doing it without stress in the body would be of the primary concern. The next thing I would do would be to transfer it into what you're about to see on the video, which is long tones and the Shikowitz studies. These are designed to, again, establish a baseline for your students where they're playing with a beautiful tone, an excellent embouchure, beauty in the attack, and the sustain and the release. So we're teaching a number of very fundamental issues, but we're doing it in a way in which they should be very successful right away, and it's not stressful on them to initiate those sounds and sustain those sounds. Be very mindful of their embouchures and be very mindful of how they initiate the tone through articulation. This is a fundamental set on which everything is built. Important items with that performance is to note how still their bodies remain throughout the performance. It's really necessary that there's no stress in the shoulders and the neck. That should have been very clear. And notice that the soft part of their abdomen is where the breath is happening. It was happening over 2 beats, and they were pushing air through the instrument. There was a complete exhale at the end of the release, and then a reinitiation of a 2-beat breath before they go back into playing the next segment. So the way the body interacts with the horn is of the utmost importance, that there's no stress, there's a strong sense of fundamentals when it comes to breathing, and then setting that embouchure and making a clear articulation at the beginning of the sound without stress is very, very important. After a series of long tones and possibly the Shikowitz studies, you could extend those, of course, to create your own length of time that you felt appropriate for your group. The next phase is to go to a lip slur-based exercise. And as you've probably heard on the last video and as you hear on this video, You hear the brass doing lip slurs on the valve combinations, but you also hear a sound that's on the fifth above tonic. That's where we place, or should place, the alto saxophone voice and the mellophone voice, which lends itself a little bit better for tuning for them, and also puts in like valve combinations for the mellophone. So just a suggestion when it comes to planning for warm-up for your alto voices, that you put them in places in which they can be successful. I chose the two side video applications for this next module because I want you to focus on a few things here. Watch the face of the brass players as they set the embouchure in the center and they breathe from their corners. It's very important that brass players in general make sure that that embouchure is very well placed, it's stable, and it's well positioned to vibrate freely with the correct application of air and muscle, a balance of air and muscle. Too much muscle means you don't need much air, and that produces a small, thin tone with not much range and definitely not much power in the sound. So they want to really err on the side of less muscle and more air. Also notice with the woodwinds, their hand position is very, very rounded, long round fingers across the instrument, and their fingers are barely moving. They're only moving enough to activate the keys. Very important for the woodwind family to have excellent hand position, as well as for the brass, but to make sure that your woodwinds have excellent hand position and mastery of moving the mechanics of the instrument. All of these things are building the foundations for the next level, but watch the next two videos here on lip slurs. One is going up, one is going down, but to extend the range of that and to create the sense of free flexibility through the use of proper air and vibration through aperture or through the reed. As I stated before, it's very important for the woodwinds and the brass to have that embouchure in a very stable position, a correct position, with the sense of set. So we talk about set and having that in the middle of the embouchure ready to go. They breathe from their corners, 2-count breath, and then they initiate the correct pitch with the correct style of articulation that we're going after in the particular exercise that we're doing. So that should have been very readily clear with their performance of the last two videos. Also notice the brass were very smooth with their lip slurs, slurring through the valve combinations and trying to hit each partial. Not extended, nothing that was overly challenging there, but enough to get them that sense of stability and warm up through that process. Woodwinds were playing the same series. They were changing fingerings for each note, but it's also good for them to reinforce the fact that they should be able to change to any note with a great hand position and excellent finger technique and create that smoothness which builds speed later. So very important that those things are together. Also notice at the end of every release, they manage to have a quality sound, so they're not blowing slow air into the release, and they're not altering the release by stopping with the tongue. There has to be an aw or a dull sense of sound, so there's resonance at the end of the sound. So they were creating that across the exercise, all the while maintaining that soft face. You didn't see stress in their neck or their chest or their shoulders. And that sense of fundamental, they were building off the last series of fundamentals with the long tones and the flow studies. So important that we just add one more element without changing necessarily the methodology in which we're successful. This next portion of the warm-up is borrowed from Jimmy Stamp's beautiful exercise number 3 that allows brass players the opportunity to really focus on the center of pitch throughout the exercise. It's great for woodwinds as well as they slur through, but the idea is we're going from the starting note and we're moving up and then down through the bottom of the instrument with a sense of smoothness, but also really trying to hit the center of all of the pitches in the exercise. So that essentially takes them down the valve combinations. It's a great exercise for building that smoothness of range from a moderate note slightly up and then going down much lower. Again, to have that sense of resonance and tone, the brass player would have to have a free sense of vibration, a great sense of use of air, and to continue that down the line. If they don't have those things working for them, it really shows up in the performance of the stamp exercise. So please pay attention to those things throughout the brass performance. Also with the woodwinds, it's great for them to slur amongst those upper notes and then going down as well. Same sense of resonance with the reed and the embouchure to create that sound. Possibly one of the most influential exercises you could do in a warm-up is called a bender exercise, where essentially you're asking your musicians to use their embouchure to change the center of the pitch down or up to create a sense of flexibility and also to teach them their understanding that they have the unique ability to alter pitch at any time through the slight manipulation of their embouchure. This is a great exercise for brass to be able to move that center and have more flexibility. It also works well with the woodwinds, even though the saxophones and the clarinets are a little less flexible. They still have the opportunity to learn about pitch manipulation. At the end of it, this also applies later on to chordal tuning, which we'll talk about shortly. But again, every player's ability to alter pitch is what we're looking at here. So you'll hear an exercise where they're playing a valved finger combination of notes, and then they're doing it through embouchure manipulation. So teaching flexibility is key, and that's why we have the bender exercise. One of the things you may have noticed by watching the videos is that the tempos are changing on almost every exercise. I think one thing to note that's important here is that the tempo setting is appropriate, it needs to be appropriate for the particular exercise that they're doing. So at the beginning, slower is better, so that way they're focused on the small things, the mastery of the fundamentals, the technique. And then later, especially in the exercise that you're about to see, tempo is a little bit more important, that it's brighter, that it's faster, that it's a little bit more challenging. It's also that it's a little bit more fun and engaging and exciting for the players as well. So our next exercise is what we call a chromatic lip slur. And here's where I start to change what the woodwinds do versus what the brass do. Initially, at the beginning of every set, they play dee-dee-dee-dee, and it's a legato tonguing exercise, and that goes into a lip slur for the brass that you'll hear. And then while they're doing that, the woodwinds are going through a chromatic evolution that goes along with the lip slur that the brass are doing. So from the bottom of the pitch going back up, And it's challenging them to turn around on certain notes that they're not necessarily used to doing in common practice. And so it's a great exercise for your woodwinds to be prepared to play a variety of chromatic scales that do a variety of things that challenge them a little bit more technically than the things that we may have done earlier in the warm-up. So please take notice of the chromatic lip slur. Setting the new thing. So really we're tying in all of the fundamentals that we did before, all the way back to breathing gem, and then linearly all the way through the exercise into now articulations. Finally, we finish with some staccato patterns that are really designed to teach short and light with fast air, so making sure there's a lot of fast air going through the note. We're lightly articulating with one or two taste buds, just ever so lightly touching. There's direction through the note, so you should have heard ticka-ticka-dom. There's a slight direction through the note at the end all the way through. And finally, keeping that embouchure and that face stable. You shouldn't see a lot of chewing or moving or jaw movement through articulation. That means they're overworking that muscle. They're overproducing, and that's not something that's desirable as well. Finally, there was a really nice 2% As we begin to round out the warm-up, it's very important that we focus on the qualities of articulation, vertical alignment. It's very important that each of the ensemble members have an airstream through the articulation, essentially blowing through. And this is lining up all of the concerns there again, are keeping our and allow for of articulation and clarity. Finally, a great way to finish is to use a chorale to establish this idea of ensemble sound, balance. In this chorale, the sound and the release of the sound, making sure that there was a shaped release, there was energy in those things. What I like about the Patterson chorale is it creates an open fifth drone, because everything is stacked vertically. If I can be of help to you at any point, you've got before you, please share with your students, and best of luck with your ensembles.